American Pastoral by Philip Roth. Read by Ron Silver. Paradise Remembered. The Swede. During the war years, when I was still a grade school boy, this was a magical name in our Newark neighborhood. Even to adults, just a generation removed from the city's old Prince Street ghetto, and not yet so flawlessly Americanized as to be bowled over by the prowess of a high school athlete. The name was magical. So was the anomalous face. Of the few fair-complexioned Jewish students in our preponderantly Jewish public high school, none possessed anything remotely like the steep-jawed, insentient Viking mask of this blue-eyed blonde born into our tribe as Seymour Irving Lvov. The Swede starred as end in football, center in basketball, and first baseman in baseball. Only the basketball team was ever any good, twice winning the city championship, while he was its leading scorer. But as long as the Swede excelled, the fate of our sports teams didn't matter much to a student body whose elders, largely undereducated and overburdened, venerated academic achievement above all else. Physical aggression, even camouflaged by athletic uniforms and official rules and intended to do no harm to Jews, was not a traditional source of pleasure in our community. Advanced degrees were. Nonetheless, through the Swede, the neighborhood entered into a fantasy about itself and about the world, the fantasy of sports fans everywhere. Almost like Gentiles, as they imagine Gentiles, our families could forget the way things actually work and make an athletic performance the repository of all their hopes. Primarily, they could forget the war. The elevation of Swede Lvov into the household Apollo of the Weequahic Jews can best be explained, I think, by the war against the Germans and the Japanese, and the fears that it fostered. With the Swede indomitable on the playing field, the meaningless surface of life provided a bizarre, delusionary kind of sustenance, the happy release into a Swedian innocence for those who lived in dread of never seeing their sons, or their brothers, or their husbands again. And how did this affect him? The glorification, the sanctification of every hook shot he sank, every pass he leaped up and caught, every line drive he rifled for a double down the left field line? Is this what made him that staid and stone-faced boy? Or was the mature, seeming sobriety the outward manifestation of an arduous inward struggle to keep in check the narcissism that an entire community was ladling with love? The high school cheerleaders had a cheer for the Swede. Unlike the other cheers, meant to inspire the whole team or to galvanize the spectators, this was a rhythmic, foot-stomping tribute to the Swede alone, enthusiasm for his perfection, undiluted and unabashed. The cheer rocked the gym at basketball games every time he took a rebound or scored a point, swept through our side of City Stadium at football games any time he gained a yard or intercepted a pass. Even at the sparsely attended home baseball games up at Irvington Park, where there was no cheerleading squad eagerly kneeling at the sidelines, you could hear it thinly chanted by the handful of Weequahic stalwarts in the wooden stands not only when the Swede came up to bat, but when he made no more than a routine put-out at first base. It was a cheer that consisted of 8 syllables, 3 of them his name, and it went ba-ba-ba, ba-ba-ba, ba-ba. And the tempo at football games, particularly, accelerated with each repetition until, at the peak of frenzied adoration, an explosion of skirt-billowing cartwheels was ecstatically discharged, and the orange gym bloomers of 10 sturdy little cheerleaders flickered like fireworks before our marveling eyes, and not for love of you or me, but of the wonderful Swede. Swede Lvov, it rhymes with the love. Swede Lvov, it rhymes with the love. Swede Lvov, it rhymes with the love. Yes, everywhere he looked, people were in love with him. The candy store owners we boys pestered called the rest of us, "Hey, you, no!" or "Kid, cut it out!" Him, they called respectfully Swede. Parents smiled and benignly addressed him as Seymour. The chattering girls he passed on the street would ostentatiously swoon, and the bravest would holler after him, come back, Lvov of my life." And he let it happen. Walked about the neighborhood in possession of all that love, looking as though he didn't feel a thing. Contrary to whatever daydreams the rest of us may have had about the enhancing effect on ourselves of total, uncritical, idolatrous adulation, the love thrust upon the Swede seemed actually to deprive him of feeling. In this boy, embraced as a symbol of hope by so many, as the embodiment of the strength, the resolve, the emboldened valor that would prevail to return our high school servicemen home unscathed from Midway, Salerno, Cherbourg, the Solomons, the Aleutians, Tarawa, there appeared to be not a drop of wit or irony to interfere with his golden gift for responsibility. But wit or irony is like a hitch in his swing for a kid like the Swede. Irony being a human consolation and beside the point if you're getting your way as a god. Either there was a whole side to his personality that he was suppressing, or that was as yet asleep, or more likely, there wasn't. His aloofness, his seeming passivity as the desired object of all this asexual lovemaking, made him appear, if not divine, a distinguished cut above the more primordial humanity of just about everybody else at the school. He was fettered to history, an instrument of history, esteemed with a passion that might never have been if he had broken the Weequahic basketball record by scoring 27 points against Barringer, on a day other than the sad, sad day in 1943, when 58 flying fortresses were shot down by Luftwaffe fighter planes. 2 fell victim to flak, and 5 more crashed after crossing the English coast on their way back from bombing Germany. The Swede's younger brother was my classmate, Jerry Lvov, a scrawny, small-headed, oddly over-flexible boy built along the lines of a licorice stick, something of a mathematical wizard, and the January 1950 valedictorian. Though Jerry never really had a friendship with anyone, in his imperious, irascible way he took an interest in me over the years, and that was how I wound up from the age of 10, regularly getting beaten by him at ping-pong in the finished basement of the Lvov's one-family house on the corner of Winmore and Keir. The word finished, indicating that it was paneled in knotty pine, domesticated, and not, as Jerry seemed to think, that the basement was the perfect place for finishing off another kid. The explosiveness of Jerry's aggression at a ping-pong table exceeded his brother's in any sport. A ping-pong ball is brilliantly sized and shaped so that it cannot take out your eye. I would not otherwise have played in Jerry Lvov's basement. If it weren't for the opportunity to tell people that I knew my way around Swede Lvov's house, nobody could have gotten me down into that basement, defenseless, but for a small wooden paddle. Nothing that weighs as little as a ping-pong ball can be lethal. Yet when Jerry whacked that thing, murder could not have been far from his mind. It never occurred to me that this violent display might have something to do with what it was like for him to be the kid brother of Swede Lvov. Since I couldn't imagine anything better than being the Swede's brother, short of being the Swede himself, I failed to understand that for Jerry it might be difficult to imagine anything worse. The Swede's bedroom, which I never dared enter but would pause to gaze into when I used the toilet outside Jerry's room, was tucked under the eaves at the back of the house. With its slanted ceiling and dormer windows and Weequahic pennants on the walls, it looked like what I thought of as a real boy's room. From the 2 windows that opened out over the back lawn, you could see the roof of the Lvov's garage, where the Swede, as a grade school kid, practiced hitting in the wintertime by swinging at a baseball taped to a cord hung from a rafter. An idea he might have got from a baseball novel by John R. Tunis called The Kid from Tompkinsville. I came to that book and to other of Tunis's baseball books, Iron Duke, The Duke Decides, Champion's Choice, Keystone Kids, Rookie of the Year, by spotting them on the built-in shelf beside the Swede's bed, all lined up alphabetically between 2 solid bronze bookends that had been a bar mitzvah gift, miniaturized replicas of Rodin's The Thinker. Immediately, I went to the library to borrow all the Tunis books I could find and started with The Kid from Tompkinsville, a grim, gripping book to a boy, simply written, stiff in places but direct and dignified, about the kid. Roy Tucker, a clean-cut young pitcher from the rural Connecticut hills whose father dies when he's 4 and whose mother dies when he's 16, and who helps his grandmother make ends meet by working the family farm during the day and working at night in town at Mackenzie's drugstore on the corner of South Main. The book, published in 1940, had black and white drawings that, with just a little expressionistic distortion and just enough anatomical skill, cannily pictorialized the hardness of the kid's life. Back before the game of baseball was illuminated with a million statistics, back when it was about the mysteries of earthly fate, when major leaguers looked less like big, healthy kids and more like lean and hungry working men. The drawings seemed conceived out of the dark austerities of Depression America. Every 10 pages or so, to succinctly depict a dramatic physical moment in the story, he was able to put a little steam in it. It was over the fence. Razzle limped to the dugout. There was a blackish, ink-heavy rendering of a scrawny, shadow-faced ball player starkly silhouetted on a blank page, isolated, like the world's most lonesome soul, from both nature and man, or set in a stipple simulation of ballpark grass, dragging beneath him the skinny statuette of a worm-like shadow. He's unglamorous, even in a baseball uniform. If he's the pitcher, his gloved hand looks like a paw. And what image after image makes graphically clear is that playing up in the majors, heroic though it may seem, is yet another form of backbreaking, unremunerative labor. The kid from Tompkinsville could as well have been called the lamb from Tompkinsville. Even the lamb from Tompkinsville led to the slaughter. In the kid's career, as the spark-plugged newcomer to a last-place Brooklyn Dodger club, each triumph is rewarded with a punishing disappointment or a crushing accident. The staunch attachment that develops between the lonely, homesick kid and the Dodgers' veteran catcher Dave Leonard, who successfully teaches him the ways of the big leagues and who, with his steady brown eyes behind the plate, shepherds him through a no-hitter, comes brutally undone 6 weeks into the season when the old-timer is dropped overnight from the club's roster. Here was a speed they didn't often mention in baseball, the speed with which a player rises and goes down. Then, after the kid wins his 15th consecutive game, a rookie record that no pitcher in either league has ever exceeded, he's accidentally knocked off his feet in the shower by boisterous teammates who are horsing around after the great victory, and the elbow injury sustained in the fall leaves him unable ever to pitch again. He rides the bench for the rest of the year, pinch hitting because of his strength at the plate, and then, over the snowy winter, back home in Connecticut, spending days on the farm and evenings at the drugstore, well known now, but really grandma's boy all over again, he works diligently by himself on Dave Leonard's directive to keep his swing level. A tendency to keep his right shoulder down, to swing up, was his worst fault. Suspending a ball from a string out in the barn and whacking at it on cold winter mornings with his beloved bat until he has worked himself into a sweat. Crack! The clean, sweet sound of a bat squarely meeting a ball. By the next season, he's ready to return to the Dodgers as a speedy right fielder, bats .325 in the second spot, and leads his team down to the wire as a contender. On the last day of the season, in a game against the Giants, who are in first place by only half a game, the kid kindles the Dodgers' hitting attack, and in the bottom of the 14th, with 2 down, 2 men on, and the Dodgers ahead on a run scored by the kid with his audacious, characteristically muscular base running, he makes the final game-saving play, a running catch smack up against the right center field wall. That tremendous daredevil feat sends the Dodgers into the World Series and leaves him writhing in agony on the green turf of deep right center. Tunis concludes like this. Dusk descended upon a mass of players, on a huge crowd pouring onto the field, on a couple of men carrying an inert form through the mob on a stretcher. There was a clap of thunder. Rain descended upon the polo grounds. Descended. A clap of thunder, and thus ends the boy's Book of Job. I was 10, and I'd never read anything like it. The cruelty of life, the injustice of it. I couldn't believe it. The reprehensible member of the Dodgers is Razzle Nugent, a great pitcher, but a drunk and a hothead, a violent bully fiercely jealous of the kid. And yet it's not Razzle carried off inert on a stretcher, but the best of them all, the farm orphan called the Kid, modest, serious, chaste, loyal, naive, undiscourageable, hard-working, soft-spoken, courageous, a brilliant athlete, a beautiful, austere boy. Needless to say, I thought of the Swede and the Kid as one, and wondered how the Swede could bear to read this book that had left me near tears and unable to sleep. Had I had the courage to address him, I would have asked if he thought the ending meant the Kid was finished, or whether it meant the possibility of yet another comeback. The word inert terrified me. Was the Kid killed by the last catch of the year? Did the Swede know? Did he care? Did it occur to him that if disaster could strike down the Kid from Tompkinsville, it could come and strike the great Swede down too? Or was a book about a sweet star savagely and unjustly punished? A book about a greatly gifted innocent whose worst fault is a tendency to keep his right shoulder down and swing up, but whom the thundering heavens destroy nonetheless? Simply a book between those thinker bookends up on his shelf? Keir Avenue was where the rich Jews lived, or rich they seemed to most of the families who rented apartments in the 2, 3, and 4-family dwellings with the brick stoops integral to our after-school sporting life. The crap games, the blackjack, and the stoop ball, endless until the cheap rubber ball hurled mercilessly against the steps went pop and split at the seam. Here, on this grid of locust tree-lined streets into which the Lyons farm had been petitioned during the boom years of the early 20s, the first post-immigrant generation of Newark's Jews had regrouped into a community that took its inspiration more from the mainstream of American life than from the Polish shtetl their Yiddish-speaking parents had recreated around Prince Street in the impoverished Third Ward. The Keir Avenue Jews, with their finished basements, their screened-in porches, their flagstone front steps, seemed to be at the forefront, laying claim like audacious pioneers to the normalizing American amenities. And at the vanguard of the vanguard were the Lvovs, who had bestowed upon us our very own Swede, a boy as close to a goy as we were going to get. The Lvovs themselves, Lou and Sylvia, were parents neither more nor less recognizably American than my own Jersey-born Jewish mother and father, no more or less refined, well-spoken, or cultivated. And that to me was a big surprise. Other than the one-family Keir Avenue house, there was no division between us like the one between the peasants and the aristocracy I was learning about at school. Mrs. Lvov was, like my own mother, a tidy housekeeper, impeccably well-mannered, a nice-looking woman tremendously considerate of everyone's feelings, with a way of making her sons feel important. One of the many women of that era who never dreamed of being free of the great domestic enterprise centered on the children. From their mother, both Lvov boys had inherited the long bones and fair hair, though since her hair was redder, frizzier, and her skin still youthfully freckled, she looked less startlingly Aryan than they did, less vivid a genetic oddity among the faces in our streets. The father was no more than 5'7" or 8", a spidery man even more agitated than the father whose anxieties were shaping my own. Mr. Lvov was one of those slum-reared Jewish fathers whose rough-hewn, undereducated perspective goaded a whole generation of striving, college-educated Jewish sons. A father for whom everything is an unshakable duty, for whom there is a right way and a wrong way and nothing in between. A father whose compound of ambitions, biases, and beliefs is so unruffled by careful thinking that he isn't as easy to escape from as he seems. Limited men with limitless energy, men quick to be friendly and quick to be fed up, men for whom the most serious thing in life is to keep going despite everything. And we were their sons. It was our job to love them. The way it fell out, my father was a chiropodist whose office was for years our living room, and who made enough money for our family to get by on, but no more, while Mr. Lvov got rich manufacturing ladies' gloves. His own father, Swede Lvov's grandfather, had come to Newark from the old country in the 1890s and found work fleshing sheepskins fresh from the lime vat, the lone Jew alongside the roughest of Newark's Slav, Irish, and Italian immigrants in the Nutman Street tannery of the patent leather tycoon T.P. Howell, then the name in the city's oldest and biggest industry, the tanning and manufacture of leather goods. The most important thing in making leather is water. Skins spinning in big drums of water, drums spewing out befouled water, pipes gushing with cool and hot water, hundreds of thousands of gallons of water. If there's soft water, good water, you can make beer and you can make leather. And Newark made both. Big breweries, big tanneries, and for the immigrant, lots of wet, smelly, crushing work. The son, Lou, Swede Lvov's father, went to work in the tannery after leaving school at 14 to help support the family of 9, and became adept not only at dyeing buckskin by laying on the clay dye with a flat, stiff brush, but also at sorting and grading skins. The tannery, that stank of both the slaughterhouse and the chemical plant from the soaking of flesh and the cooking of flesh, and the dehairing and pickling and degreasing of hides, where round the clock in the summertime, the blowers drying the thousands and thousands of hanging skins raised the temperature in the low-ceiling dried room to 120 degrees, where the vast vat rooms were dark as caves and flooded with swill, where brutish workingmen, heavily aproned, armed with hooks and staves, dragging and pushing overloaded wagons, wringing and hanging waterlogged skins, were driven like animals through the laborious storm that was a 12-hour shift, a filthy, stinking place awash with water dyed red and black and blue and green, with hunks of skin all over the floor, everywhere pits of grease, hills of salt, barrels of solvent. This was Lou Lvov's high school and college. What was amazing was not how tough he turned out. What was amazing was how civil he could sometimes still manage to be. From Howell and Company, he graduated in his early 20s to found, with 2 of his brothers, a small handbag outfit specializing in alligator skins contracted from R.G. Salomon, Newark's king of cordovan leather and leader in the tanning of alligator. For a time, the business looked as if it might flourish. But after the crash, the company went under, bankrupting the 3 hustling, audacious Lvovs. Newark Maid Leatherware started up a few years later, with Lou Lvov, now on his own, buying seconds in leather goods, imperfect handbags, gloves, and belts, and selling them out of a pushcart on weekends and door-to-door at night. Down Neck, the semi-peninsular protuberance that is easternmost Newark, where each fresh wave of immigrants first settled, the lowlands bounded to the north and east by the Passaic River, and to the south by the salt marshes. There were Italians who'd been glovers in the old country, and they began doing piecework for him in their homes. Out of the skins he supplied, they cut and sewed ladies' gloves that he peddled around the state. By the time the war broke out, he had a collective of Italian families cutting and stitching kid gloves in a small loft on West Market Street. It was a marginal business, no real money, until, in 1942, the bonanza. A black-lined sheepskin dress glove ordered by the Women's Army Corps. He leased the old umbrella factory, a smoke-darkened brick pile 50 years old and 4 stories high on Central Avenue and 2nd Street, and very shortly purchased it outright, leasing the top floor to a zipper company. Newark Maid began pumping out gloves, and every 2 or 3 days the truck backed up and took them away. A cause for jubilation even greater than the government contract was the Bamberger account. Newark made crack Bambergers and then became the major manufacturer of their fine ladies' gloves because of an unlikely encounter between Lou Lvov and Louis Bamberger. At a ceremonial dinner for Maya Ellenstein, a city commissioner since 1933 and the only Jew ever to be mayor of Newark, Some higher-up from BAMS, hearing that Swede Lvov's father was present, came over to congratulate him on his boy's selection by the Newark News as an all-county center in basketball. Alert to the opportunity of a lifetime, the opportunity to cut through all obstructions and go right to the top, Lou Lvov brazenly talked his way into an introduction, right there at the Ellenstein dinner, to the legendary L. Bamberger himself, founder of Newark's most prestigious department store and the philanthropist who'd given the city its museum, a powerful personage as meaningful to local Jews as Bernard Baruch was meaningful to Jews around the country for his close association with FDR. According to the gossip that permeated the neighborhood, although Bamberger barely did more than shake Lou Lvov's hand and quiz him about the Swede, for a couple of minutes at most, Lou Lvov had dared to say to his face, "Mr. Bamberger, we've got the quality, we've got the price, why can't we sell you people gloves?" And before the month was out, BAMS had placed an order with Newark Maid, its first, for 500 dozen pairs. By the end of the war, Newark Maid had established itself, in no small part because of Swede Lvov's athletic achievement, as one of the most respected names in ladies' gloves south of Gloversville, New York, the center of the glove trade, where Lou Lvov shipped his hides by rail through Fultonville to be tanned by the best glove tannery in the business. Little more than a decade later, with the opening of a factory in Puerto Rico in 1958, the Swede would himself become the young president of the company, commuting every morning down to Central Avenue from his home some 30-odd miles west of Newark, out past the suburbs, a short-range pioneer living on a 100-acre farm on a back road in the sparsely habited hills beyond Morristown, in wealthy, rural, old Rimrock, New Jersey, a long way from the tannery floor where Grandfather Lvov had begun in America, paring away from the true skin, the rubbery flesh that had ghoulishly swelled to twice its thickness in the great lime vats. The day after graduating Weequahic in June 45, the Swede had joined the Marine Corps, eager to be in on the fighting that ended the war. It was rumored that his parents were beside themselves and did everything to talk him out of the Marines and get him into the Navy. Even if he surmounted the notorious Marine Corps anti-Semitism, did he imagine himself surviving the invasion of Japan? But the Swede would not be dissuaded from meeting the manly, patriotic challenge, secretly set for himself just after Pearl Harbor, of going off to fight as one of the toughest of the tough, should the country still be at war when he graduated high school. He was just finishing up his boot training at Parris Island, South Carolina, where the scuttlebutt was that the Marines were to hit the Japanese beaches on March 1, 1946, when the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. As a result, the Swede got to spend the rest of his hitch as a recreation specialist right there on Parris Island. He ran the calisthenic drill for his battalion for half an hour before breakfast every morning, arranged for the boxing smokers to entertain the recruits a couple of nights a week, and the bulk of the time played for the base team against armed forces teams throughout the South. Basketball all winter long, baseball all summer long. He was stationed down in South Carolina about a year when he became engaged to an Irish Catholic girl whose father, a Marine major and a one-time Purdue football coach, had procured him the cushy job as drill instructor in order to keep him at Parris Island to play ball. Several months before the Swede's discharge, his own father made a trip to Parris Island, stayed for a full week near the base at the hotel in Beaufort, and departed only when the engagement to Miss Dunleavy had been broken off. The Swede returned home in 47 to enroll at Uppsala College in East Orange, at 20 unencumbered by a Gentile wife and all the more glamorously heroic for having made his mark as a Jewish Marine, a drill instructor no less, and at arguably the cruelest military training camp anywhere in the world. Marines are made at boot camp, and Seymour Irving Lvov had helped to make them. We knew all this because the mystique of the Swede lived on in the corridors and classrooms of the high school, where I was by then a student. I remember 2 or 3 times one spring trekking out with friends to Viking Field in East Orange to watch the Uppsala baseball team play a Saturday home game. Their star cleanup hitter and first baseman was the Swede. 3 home runs one day against Muhlenberg. Whenever we saw a man in the stands wearing a suit and a hat, we would whisper to one another, "A scout! A scout!" I was away at college when I heard from a schoolyard pal still living in the neighborhood that the Swede had been offered a contract with a Double-A Giant Farm Club, but had turned it down to join his father's company instead. Later, I learned through my parents about the Swede's marriage to Miss New Jersey. Before competing at Atlantic City for the 1949 Miss America title, she had been Miss Union County, and before that, Spring Queen at Uppsala. From Elizabeth. A shiksa. Dawn Dwyer. He'd done it. One night in the summer of 1985, while visiting New York, I went out to see the Mets play the Astros, and while circling the stadium with my friends looking for the gate to our seats, I saw the Swede, 36 years older than when I watched him play ball for Uppsala. He wore a white shirt, a striped tie, and a charcoal gray summer suit, and he was still terrifically handsome. The golden hair was a shade or two darker, but not any thinner. No longer was it cut short, but fell rather fully over his ears and down to his collar. In this suit that fit him so exquisitely, he seemed even taller and leaner than I remembered him in the uniform of one sport or another. The woman with us noticed him first. "Who is that?" Is that John Lindsay?" she asked. "No," I said. "My God." "You know who that is? It's Swede Lvov." I told my friends, "That's the Swede." A skinny, fair-haired boy of about 7 or 8 was walking alongside the Swede, a kid under a Mets cap pounding away at a first baseman's mitt that dangled, as had the Swede's, from his left hand. The two, clearly a father and his son, were laughing about something together when I approached and introduced myself. "I knew your brother at Weequahic." "You're Zuckerman?" he replied, vigorously shaking my hand. "The author?" "I'm Zuckerman, the author." "Sure, you were Jerry's great pal." I don't think Jerry had great pals. He was too brilliant for pals. He just used to beat my pants off at ping pong down in your basement. Beating me at ping pong was very important to Jerry. "So you're the guy." My mother says, "And he was such a nice, quiet child when he came to the house." "You know who this is?" the Swede said to the boy. "The guy who wrote those books, Nathan Zuckerman." Mystified, the boy shrugged and muttered, "Hi. This is my son, Chris." "These are our friends," I said, sweeping an arm out to introduce the 3 people with me. "And this man," I said to them, "is the greatest athlete in the history of Weequahic High. A real artist in 3 sports, played first base like Hernandez, thinking. A line drive doubles hitter. Do you know that?" I said to his son. "Your dad was our Hernandez." "Hernandez is a lefty," he replied. "Well, that's the only difference," I said to the little literalist, and put out my hand again to his father. "Nice to see you, Swede." "You bet. Take it easy, Skip." "Remember me to your brother," I said. He laughed, we parted, and someone was saying to me, Well, the greatest athlete in the history of Weequahic High called you Skip." I know. I can't believe it. And I did feel almost as wonderfully singled out as I had the one time before at the age of 10, when the Swede had got so personal as to recognize me by the playground nickname I acquired because of 2 grades I skipped in grade school. Midway through the first inning, the woman with us turned to me and said, "You should have seen your face. You might as well have told us he was Zeus. I saw just what you looked like as a boy." The following letter reached me by way of my publisher a couple of weeks before Memorial Day, 1995. Dear Skip Zuckerman, I apologize for any inconvenience this letter may cause you. You may not remember our meeting at Shea Stadium. I was with my oldest son, now a first-year college student, and you were out with some friends to see the Mets. That was 10 years ago, the era of Carter, Gooden, Hernandez, when you could still watch the Mets. You can't anymore. I'm writing to ask if we might meet sometime to talk. I'd be delighted to take you to dinner in New York if you'd permit me. I'm taking the liberty of proposing a meeting because of something I've been thinking about since my father died last year. He was 96. He was his feisty, combative self right down to the end. That made it all the harder to see him go, despite his advanced age. I'd like to talk about him and his life. I've been trying to write a tribute to him to be published privately for friends, family, and business associates. Most everybody thought of my father as indestructible, a thick-skinned man on a short fuse. That was far from the truth. Not everyone knew how much he suffered because of the shocks that befell his loved ones. Please be assured that I'll understand if you haven't time to respond. Sincerely, Seymour, Swede, Lvov, Weequahic High School, 1945. Had anyone else asked if he could talk to me about a tribute he was writing to his father, I would have wished him luck and kept my nose out of it. But there were compelling reasons for my getting off a note to the Swede, within the hour, to say that I was at his disposal. The first was, Swede Lvov wants to meet me. Ridiculously, perhaps, at the onset of old age, I had only to see his signature at the foot of the letter to be swamped by memories of him, both on and off the field, that were some 50 years old and yet still captivating. I remembered going up every day to the playing field to watch football practice the year that the Swede first agreed to join the team. He was already a high-scoring hookshot artist on the basketball court, but no one knew he could be just as magical on the football field, until the coach pressed him into duty as an end. And our losing team, though still at the bottom of the city league, was putting up 1, 2, even 3 touchdowns a game, all scored on passes to the Swede. 50 or 60 kids gathered along the sidelines at practice to watch the Swede, in a battered leather helmet and the brown jersey numbered, in orange, 11, working out with the varsity against the JVs. The varsity quarterback, Lefty Leventhal, ran pass play after pass play. Leventhal to Lvov, Leventhal to Lvov was an anapest that could always get us going back in the heyday of the Swede, and the task of the JV squad, playing defense, was to stop Swede Lvov from scoring every time. I'm over 60. Not exactly someone with the outlook on life that he had as a boy. And yet the boy's beguilement has never wholly evaporated. For to this day, I haven't forgotten the Swede, after being smothered by tacklers, climbing slowly to his feet, shaking himself off, casting an upward remonstrative glance at the darkening fall sky, sighing ruefully, and then trotting undamaged back to the huddle. When he scored, that was one kind of glory. And when he got tackled and piled on hard and just stood up and shook it off, that was another kind of glory, even in a scrimmage. And then, one day, I shared in that glory. I was 10, never before touched by greatness, and would have been as beneath the Swede's attention as anyone else along the sidelines had it not been for Jerry Lvov. Jerry had recently taken me on board as a friend, though I was hard put to believe it. The Swede must have noticed me around their house. And so late on a fall afternoon in 1943, when he got slammed to the ground by the whole of the JV team after catching a short Leventhal bullet, and the coach abruptly blew the whistle signaling that was it for the day, the Swede tentatively, flexing an elbow while half running and half limping off the field, spotted me among the other kids and called over, "Basketball was never like this, Skip." The god, himself all of 16, had carried me up into athlete's heaven. The adored had acknowledged the adoring. Of course, with athletes, as with movie idols, each worshiper imagines that he or she has a secret personal link, but this was one forged openly by the most unostentatious of stars and before a hushed congregation of competitive kids. An amazing experience, and I was thrilled. I blushed. I was thrilled. I probably thought of nothing else for the rest of the week. The mock-jock self-pity, the manly generosity, the princely graciousness, the athlete's self-pleasure so abundant that a portion can be freely given to the crowd. This munificence not only overwhelmed me and wafted through me because it had come wrapped in my nickname, but became fixed in my mind as an embodiment of something grander even than his talent for sports. The talent for being himself. The capacity to be this strange, engulfing force, and yet to have a voice and a smile unsullied by even a flicker of superiority. The natural modesty of someone for whom there were no obstacles, who appeared never to have to struggle to clear a space for himself. I don't imagine I'm the only grown man who was a Jewish kid aspiring to be an all-American kid during the Patriotic War years. when our entire neighborhood's wartime hopes seemed to converge in the marvelous body of the Swede, who's carried with him through life recollections of this gifted boy's unsurpassable style. The Jewishness that he wore so lightly as one of the tall, blonde, athletic winners must have spoken to us, too. In our idolizing the Swede and his unconscious oneness with America, I suppose there was a tinge of shame and self-rejection. Conflicting Jewish desires awakened by the sight of him were simultaneously becalmed by him. The contradiction in Jews who want to fit in and want to stand out, who insist they are different and insist they are no different, resolved itself in the triumphant spectacle of this Swede, who was actually only another of our neighborhood Seymours whose forebears had been Solomons and Sauls, and who would themselves beget Stevens, who would in turn beget Shawns. Where was the Jew in him? You couldn't find it, and yet you knew it was there. Where was the irrationality in him? Where was the crybaby in him? Where were the wayward temptations? No guile, no artifice, no mischief. All that he had eliminated to achieve his perfection. No striving, no ambivalence, no doubleness. Just the style, the natural physical refinement of a star. Only, what did he do for subjectivity? What was the Swede's subjectivity? There had to be a substratum, but its composition was unimaginable. That was the second reason I answered his letter, the substratum. What sort of mental existence had been his? What, if anything, had ever threatened to destabilize the Swede's trajectory? No one gets through unmarked by brooding, grief, confusion, and loss. Even those who had it all as kids, sooner or later get the average share of misery, if not sometimes more. There had to have been consciousness, and there had to have been blight. Yet I couldn't picture the form taken by either, could not desimplify him even now. In the residuum of adolescent imagination, I was still convinced that for the Swede, it had to have been pain-free all the way. But what had he been alluding to in that careful, courteous letter, when speaking of the late father, a man not as thick-skinned as people thought? He wrote, "Not everyone knew how much he suffered because of the shocks that befell his loved ones." No, the Swede had suffered a shock. And it was suffering the shock that he wanted to talk about. It wasn't the father's life. It was his own that he wanted revealed. I was wrong. We met at an Italian restaurant in the West 40s, where the Swede had for years been taking his family whenever they came over to New York for a Broadway show or to watch the Knicks at the Garden. And I understood right off that I wasn't going to get anywhere near the substratum. Everybody at Vincent's knew him by name. Vincent himself, Vincent's wife, Louis the maitre d', Carlo the bartender, Billy our waiter. Everybody knew Mr. Lvov, and everybody asked after the missus and the boys. It turned out that when his parents were alive, he used to bring them to celebrate an anniversary or a birthday at Vincent's. No, I thought, he's invited me here to reveal only that he is as admired on West 49th Street as he was on Chancellor Avenue. Vincent's is one of those oldish Italian restaurants tucked into the midtown West Side streets between Madison Square Garden and the Plaza. Small restaurants, 3 tables wide and 4 chandeliers deep, with decor and menus that have changed hardly at all since before arugula was discovered. There was a ball game on the TV set by the small bar, and a customer every once in a while would get up, look for a minute, ask the bartender the score, ask how Mattingly was doing, and head back to his meal. The chairs were upholstered in electric turquoise plastic, the floor was tiled in speckled salmon, one wall was mirrored, the chandeliers were fake brass, and for decoration there was a 5-foot-tall bright red pepper grinder standing in one corner like a Giacometti. A gift, said the Swede, to Vincent from his hometown in Italy. Counterbalancing it, in the opposite corner, on a stand like statuary, stood a stout Jeroboam of Barolo. A table piled with jars of Vincent's marinara sauce was just across from the bowl of free after-dinner mints, beside Mrs. Vincent's register. On the dessert cart was the Napoleon, the tiramisu, the layer cake, the apple tart, and the sugared strawberries, and behind our table on the wall were the autographed photographs. Best regards to Vincent and Anne, of Sammy Davis Jr., Joe Namath, Liza Minnelli, Kay Ballard, Gene Kelly, Jack Carter, Phil Rizzuto, and Johnny and Joanna Carson. There should have been one of the Swede, of course, and there would have been if we were still fighting the Germans and the Japanese and across the street were Weequahic High. Our waiter, Billy, a small, heavy-set, bald man with a boxer's flattened nose, didn't have to ask the Swede what he wanted to eat. For over 30 years, the Swede had been ordering from Billy the house specialty, ziti alla Vincent, preceded by clams posilipo. Best baked ziti in New York, the Swede told me. But I ordered my own old-fashioned favorite, the chicken cacciatore off the bone, at Billy's suggestion. While writing up our order, Billy told the Swede that Tony Bennett had been in the evening before. For a man with Billy's compact build, a man you might have imagined lugging around a weightier burden all his life than a plate of ziti, Billy's voice, high-pitched and intense, taut from some distress too long endured, was unexpected and a real treat. "See where your friend is sitting? See his chair, Mr. Lvov? Tony Bennett sat in that chair." To me, he said, "You know what Tony Bennett says when people come up to his table and introduce themselves to him? He says, 'Nice to see you,' and you're in his seat." That ended the entertainment. It was work from there on out. He had brought photographs of his 3 boys to show me, and from the appetizer through to dessert, virtually all conversation was about 18-year-old Chris, 16-year-old Steve, and 14-year-old Kent. Which boy was better at lacrosse than at baseball, but was being pressured by a coach? Which was as good at soccer as at football, but couldn't decide? Which was the diving champion who had also broken school records in butterfly and backstroke? All 3 were hardworking students. A's and B's. One was into the sciences, another was more community-minded, while the third, etc. There was one photograph of the boys with their mother, a good-looking 40-ish blonde, advertising manager for a Morris County weekly, but she hadn't begun her career, the Swede was quick to add, until their youngest had entered 2nd grade. The boys were lucky to have a mom who still put staying at home and raising the kids ahead of... I was impressed, as the meal wore on, by how assured he seemed of everything commonplace he said, and how everything he said was suffused by his good nature. I kept waiting for him to lay bare something more than this pointed unobjectionableness, but all that rose to the surface was more surface. What he has instead of a being, I thought, is blandness. The guy's radiant with it. He has devised for himself an incognito, and the incognito has become him. Several times during the meal, I didn't think I was going to make it. Didn't think I'd get to dessert if he was going to keep praising his family and praising his family, until I began to wonder if it wasn't that he was incognito, but that he was mad. Something was on top of him that had called a halt to him. Something had turned him into a human platitude. Something had warned him, you must not run counter to anything. The Swede, some 6 or 7 years my senior, was close to 70, and yet he was no less splendid looking for the crevices at the corners of his eyes, and, beneath the promontory of cheekbones, a little more hollowing out than classic standards of ruggedness required. I chalked up the gauntness to a regimen of serious jogging or tennis, until near the end of the meal I found out that he had prostate surgery during the winter and was only beginning to regain the weight he'd lost. I don't know if it was learning that he'd suffered an affliction, or his confessing to one that most surprised me. I even wondered if it might not be his recent experience of the surgery and its after-effects that was feeding my sense of someone who was not mentally sound. At one point I interrupted and, trying not to appear in any way desperate, asked about the business, what it was like these days running a factory in Newark. That's how I discovered that Newark Maid hadn't been in Newark since the early 70s. Virtually the whole industry had moved offshore. The unions had made it more and more difficult for a manufacturer to make any money. You could hardly find people to do that kind of piecework anymore, or to do it the way you wanted it done. And elsewhere there was an availability of workers who could be trained nearly to the standards that had obtained in the glove industry 40, 50 years ago. His family had kept the operation going in Newark for quite a long time. Out of duty to long-standing employees, most of whom were black, the Swede had hung on for some 6 years after the '67 riots, held on in the face of industry-wide economic realities and his father's imprecations as long as he possibly could. But when he was unable to stop the erosion of the workmanship, which had deteriorated steadily since the riots, he'd given up, managing to get out more or less unharmed by the city's collapse. All the Newark Maid factory had suffered in the 4 days of rioting was some broken windows, though 50 yards from the gate to his loading dock, out on West Market, 2 other buildings had been gutted by fire and abandoned. Taxes, corruption, and race. My old man's litany. Anybody at all, people from all over the country who couldn't care less about the fate of Newark, made no difference to him. Whether it was down in Miami Beach at the condo, on a cruise ship in the Caribbean, they'd get an earful about his beloved old Newark, butchered to death by taxes, corruption, and race. My father was one of those Prince Street guys who loved that city all his life. What happened to Newark broke his heart. It's the worst city in the world, Skip, the Swede was telling me. Used to be the city where they manufactured everything. Now it's the car theft capital of the world. Did you know that? Not the most gruesome of the gruesome developments, but it's awful enough. The thieves lived mostly in our old neighborhood. Black kids, 40 cars stolen in Newark every 24 hours. That's the statistic. Something, isn't it? And they're murder weapons. Once they're stolen, they're flying missiles. The target is anybody in the street. Old people, toddlers, doesn't matter. Out in front of our factory was the Indianapolis Speedway to them. That's another reason we left. 4 or 5 kids drooping out the windows 80 miles an hour right on Central Avenue. When my father bought the factory, there were trolley cars on Central Avenue. Further down were the auto showrooms, Central, Cadillac, LaSalle. There was a factory where somebody was making something in every side street. Now, there's a liquor store in every street, a liquor store, a pizza stand, and a seedy storefront church. Everything else in ruins or boarded up. But when my father bought the factory a stone's throw away, Kyler made water coolers, Fort Gang made fire alarms, Lasky made corsets, Robbins made pillows, Honig made pen points. Christ, I sound like my father. But he was right. The joint's jumping, he used to say. The major industry now is car theft. Sit at a light in Newark, anywhere in Newark, and all you're doing is looking around you. Bergen, the Alliance is where I got rammed. Remember Henry's, the sweet shop next to the Park Theater? Well, right there, where Henry's used to be, took my first high school date to Henry's for a soda. In a booth there, Arlene Danziger took her for black and white soda after the movie. But a black and white doesn't mean a soda anymore on Bergen Street. It means the worst kind of hatred in the world. A car coming the wrong way on a one-way street, and they rammed me. 4 kids drooping out the windows. 2 of them get out, laughing, choking, point a gun at my head. I hand over the keys, and one of them takes off in my car. Right in front of what used to be Henry's. It's something horrible. They rammed cop cars in broad daylight, front-end collisions to explode the airbags. Donutting. Heard of donutting? Doing donuts? You haven't heard about this? This is what they steal the cars for. Top speed, they slam on the brakes, yank the emergency brake, twist the steering wheel, and the car starts spinning. Wheeling the car in circles at tremendous speeds. Killing pedestrians means nothing to them. Killing motorists means nothing to them. Killing themselves means nothing to them. The skid marks were enough to frighten you. They killed a woman right out in front of our place. Same week my car was stolen. Doing a donut. I witnessed this. I was leaving for the day. Tremendous speed. The car groaning, ungodly screeching. It was terrifying. It made my blood run cold. Just driving her own car out of 2nd Street. And this woman, young black woman, gets it. Mother of 3 kids. 2 days later, it's one of my own employees. A black guy, but they don't care. Black, white, doesn't matter to them. They'll kill anyone. Fellow named Clark Tyler, my shipping guy, all he's doing is pulling out of our lot to go home. 12 hours of surgery, 4 months in a hospital, permanent disability. Head injuries, internal injuries, broken pelvis, broken shoulder, fractured spine, high-speed chase. Crazy kid in a stolen car, and the cops are chasing him, and the kid plows right into him, crushes the driver's side door, and that's it for Clark. 80 miles an hour down Central Avenue. The car thief is 12 years old. To see over the wheel, he has to roll up the floor mats to sit on. 6 months in Jamesburg, and he's back behind the wheel of another stolen car. Nope, that was it for me, too. My car's robbed at gunpoint. They cripple Clark. The woman gets killed. That week did it. That was enough. Newark Maid manufactured now exclusively in Puerto Rico. For a while, after leaving Newark, he contracted with the communist government in Czechoslovakia and divided the work between his own factory in Ponce, Puerto Rico, and a Czech glove factory in Brno. However, when a plant that suited him went up for sale in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico, over near Mayaguez, he bailed out on the Czechs, whose bureaucracy had been irritating from the start, and unified his manufacturing operation by purchasing a second Puerto Rico facility, another good-sized factory, moved in the machinery, started a training program, and hired an additional 300 people. By the 80s, though, even Puerto Rico began to grow expensive, and about everybody but Newark Maid fled to wherever in the Far East the labor force was abundant and cheap, to the Philippines first, then Korea, Taiwan, and now to China. Even baseball gloves, the most American glove of all, which used to be made by friends of his father's, the Denkerts, up in Johnstown, New York, for a long time now had been manufactured in Korea. When the first guy left Gloversville, New York in 52 or 53 and went to the Philippines to make gloves, they laughed at him, as though he were going to the moon. But when he died around 1978, he had a factory there with 4,000 workers, and the whole industry had gone essentially from Gloversville to the Philippines. Up in Gloversville, when the Second World War began, there must have been 90 glove factories, big and small. Today, there isn't a one. All of them out of business or importers from abroad. People who don't know a fourchette from a thumb, the Swede said. They're business people. They know if they need 100,000 pairs of this and 200,000 pairs of that in so many colors and so many sizes, but they don't know the details on how to get it done. What's a fourchette, I asked. The part of the glove between the fingers, those small oblong pieces between the fingers. They're die-cut along with the thumbs. Those are the fourchettes. Today you've got a lot of underqualified people, probably don't know half what I knew when I was 5, and they're making some pretty big decisions. A guy buying deerskin, which can run up to maybe $3.50 a foot for a garment grade, he's buying this fine garment grade deerskin to cut a little palm patch to go on a pair of ski gloves. I talked to him just the other day, a novelty part. Runs about 5 inches by 1 inch, and he pays $3.50 a foot where he could have paid $1.50 a foot and come out a long, long ways ahead. You multiply this over a large order, you're talking a $100,000 mistake. He never knew it. He could have put $100,000 in his pocket. The Swede found himself hanging on in Puerto Rico, he explained, the way he had hung on in Newark, in large part because he had trained a lot of good people to do the intricate work of making a glove carefully and meticulously. People who could give him what Newark Maid had demanded in quality going back to his father's days, but also, he had to admit, staying on because his family so much enjoyed the vacation home he built some 15 years ago on the Caribbean coast, not very far from the Ponce plant. The life the kids lived there, they just loved, and off he went again. Kent, Chris, Steve, water skiing, sailing, scuba diving, catamaraning, and though it was clear from all he had just been telling me that this guy could be engaging if he wanted to be, he didn't appear to have any judgment at all as to what was and wasn't interesting about his world. Or, for reasons I couldn't understand, he didn't want his world to be interesting. I would have given anything to get him back to Kyle of Fortgang, Lasky, Robbins, Honig, back to the fourchettes, and the details on how to get a good glove done. Even back to the guy who paid $3.50 a foot for the wrong grade of deerskin for a novelty pup. But once he was off and running, there was no civil way I could find to shift his focus for a second time from the achievements of his boys on land and sea. While we waited for dessert, the Swede let pass that he was indulging himself in a fattening zabalion on top of the ziti only because, after having had his prostate removed a couple of months back, he was still some 10 pounds underweight. The operation went okay? Just fine, he replied. A couple of friends of mine, I said, didn't emerge from that surgery as they hoped to. That operation can be a real catastrophe for a man, even if they get the cancer out. Yes, that happens, I know. One wound up impotent, I said. The other's impotent and incontinent. Fellows my age, it's been rough for them, desolating. It can leave you in diapers. The person I had referred to as the other was me. I'd had the surgery in Boston, and except for confiding in a Boston friend who had helped me through the ordeal till I was back on my feet, when I returned to the house where I live alone, 2.5 hours west of Boston in the Berkshires, I had thought it best to keep to myself both the fact that I'd had the cancer and the ways it had left me impaired. Well, said the Swede, I got off easy, I guess. I'd say you did, I replied amiably enough, thinking that this big Jeroboam of self-contentment really was in possession of all he had ever wanted. To respect everything one is supposed to respect, to protest nothing, never to be inconvenienced by self-distrust, never to be enmeshed in obsession, tortured by incapacity, poisoned by resentment, driven by anger. Life just unraveling for the Swede like a fluffy ball of yarn. This line of thinking brought me back to his letter, his request for professional advice about the tribute to his father that he was trying to write. I wasn't myself going to bring up the tribute, and yet the puzzle remained not only as to why he didn't, but as to why, if he didn't, he hadn't written me about it in the first place. I could only conclude, given what I now knew of this life, neither overly rich in contrasts, nor troubled too much by contradiction, that the letter and its contents had to do with the operation, with something uncharacteristic that arose in him afterward, some surprising new emotion that had come to the fore. Yes, I thought, the letter grew out of Swede Lavoe's belated discovery of what it means to be not healthy but sick, to be not strong but weak, what it means to not look great, what physical shame is, what humiliation is, what the gruesome is, what extinction is, what it is like to ask, why? Betrayed all at once by a wonderful body that had furnished him only with assurance and had constituted the bulk of his advantage over others, he had momentarily lost his equilibrium and had clutched at me, of all people, as a means of grasping his dead father and calling up the father's power to protect him. For a moment, his nerve was shattered, and this man, who, as far as I could tell, used himself mainly to conceal himself, had been transformed into an impulsive, devitalized being in dire need of a blessing. Death had burst into the dream of his life, as for the second time in 10 years it had burst into mine, and the things that disquiet men our age disquieted even him. I wondered if he was willing any longer to recall the sickbed vulnerability that had made certain inevitabilities as real for him as the exterior of his family's life. To remember the shadow that had insinuated itself like a virulent icing between the layers and layers of contentment. Yet, he showed up for our dinner date. Did that mean the unendurable wasn't blotted out? The safeguards weren't back in place? The emergency wasn't yet over? Or was showing up and going blithely on about everything that was endurable his way of purging the last of his fears? The more I thought about this simple-seeming soul sitting across from me eating zabalion and exuding sincerity, the farther from him my thinking carried me. The man within the man was scarcely perceptible to me. I couldn't make sense of him. I couldn't imagine him at all, having come down with my own strain of the Swede's disorder. The inability to draw conclusions about anything but exteriors. Rooting around trying to figure this guy out is ridiculous, I told myself. This is the jar you can't open. This guy can't be cracked by thinking. That's the mystery of his mystery. It's like trying to get something out of Michelangelo's David. I'd given him my number in my letter. Why hadn't he called to break the date if he was no longer deformed by the prospect of death? Once it was all back to how it had always been, once he recovered that special luminosity that had never failed to win whatever he wanted, what use did he have for me? No. His letter, I thought, can't be the whole story. If it were, he wouldn't have come. Something remains of the rash urge to change things. Something that overtook him in the hospital is still there. An unexamined existence no longer serves his needs. He wants something recorded. That's why he's turned to me. To record what might otherwise be forgotten. Omitted and forgotten. What could it be? Or maybe he was just a happy man. Happy people exist too. Why shouldn't they? All this scattershot speculation about the Swede's motives was only my professional impatience, my trying to imbue Swede Lavoe with something like the tendentious meaning Tolstoy assigned to Ivan Ilyich, so belittled by the author in the uncharitable story in which he sets out to heartlessly expose in clinical terms what it is to be ordinary. Ivan Ilyich is the well-placed high court official who leads a decorous life approved of by society, and who, on his deathbed, in the depths of his unceasing agony and terror, thinks, maybe I did not live as I ought to have done. Ivan Ilyich's life, writes Tolstoy, summarizing right at the outset, his judgment of the presiding judge, with the delightful St. Petersburg house and a handsome salary of 3,000 rubles a year, and friends all of a good social position, had been most simple and most ordinary, and therefore most terrible. Maybe so. Maybe in Russia in 1886, but in old Rimrock, New Jersey in 1995, when the Ivan Ilyiches come trooping back to lunch at the clubhouse after their morning round of golf and start to crow, "It doesn't get any better than this," they may be a lot closer to the truth than Leo Tolstoy ever was. Swede Lvov's life, for all I knew, had been most simple and most ordinary, and therefore just great, right in the American grain. "Is Jerry gay?" I suddenly asked. "My brother?" The Swede laughed. "You're kidding." Maybe I was, and had asked the question out of mischief, to alleviate the boredom. Yet I did happen to be remembering that line the Swede had written me about how much his father had suffered because of the shocks that befell his loved ones, which led me to wondering again what he had been alluding to, which spontaneously reminded me of the humiliation Jerry had brought upon himself in our junior year of high school when he attempted to win the heart of a strikingly unexceptional girl in our class, who you wouldn't have thought required a production to get her to kiss you. As a Valentine present, Jerry made a coat for her out of hamster skins, 175 hamster skins that he cured in the sun and then sewed together with a curved sewing needle pilfered from his father's factory, where the idea dawned on him. The high school biology department had been given a gift of some 300 hamsters for the purpose of dissection, and Jerry diligently finagled to collect the skins from the biology students. His oddness and his genius made credible the story he told about a scientific experiment he was conducting at home. He finagled next to find out the girl's height. He designed a pattern, and then, after he got most of the stink out of the hides, or thought he had, by drying them in the sun on the roof of his garage, he meticulously sewed the skins together, finishing the coat off with a silk lining made out of a section of a white parachute, an imperfect parachute his brother had sent home to him as a memento from the Marine Air Base in Cherry Point, North Carolina, where the Paris Island team won the last game of the season for the Marine Corps Baseball Championship. The only person Jerry told about the coat was me, the ping-pong stooge. He was going to send it to the girl in a Bamberger's coat box of his mother's, wrapped in lavender tissue paper and tied with velvet ribbon. But when the coat was finished, it was so stiff, because of the idiotic way he dried the skins, his father would later explain, that he couldn't get it to fold up in the box. Across from the Swede, in Vincent's restaurant, I suddenly recall seeing it in the basement. This big thing sitting on the floor with sleeves. Today, I was thinking, it would win all kinds of prizes at the Whitney Museum, but back in Newark in 1949, nobody knew dick about what great art was, and Jerry and I racked our brains trying to figure out what he could do to get the coat into the box. He was set on that box because she would think, when she began to open it, that it contained an expensive coat from BAMS.